Okay, let's get started. Thanks to everyone who is here. Just to answer the inevitable question, we will be recording and sharing these slides afterwards. And we actually the slides that we'll be sharing are slightly different than the presentation that we're doing and include more notes. So I strongly recommend that afterwards you look through the slides because I think they'll have helpful notes to be able to see. Again, thanks everyone for coming. And let's get started. So just to go over what we'll be talking about today, this is the more nitty-gritty part of our presentation. So we'll do a quick recap of session 1 from last week and our work at Solar One, local laws 92 and 94, and the SolarWare feasible mandate. And then we'll really dive into the solar screening tool and how to use it to determine solar feasibility and the solar feasibility review process and how that works through HPD's programs. And then we'll have a quick conclusion. So to start off, I want to just tell you about the organization that Noah and I work for. We are part of an organization called Solar One, which is an environmental education nonprofit in New York City. We have a green jobs training program. We have a park on the East River. We have a clean energy education program in New York City public schools. And then the program that Noah and I are from is called Here Comes Solar, which works to make solar accessible to high barrier sectors in the city, especially affordable housing. So we do technical assistance at every step of the way to make it as easy for someone to go solar on a multifamily building in an urban area as it would be for a single family home in the suburbs where solar has been really booming for the past decade or so. And last year, NYSERDA funded a 3-year partnership to support HPD's new SolarWare feasible mandate so that Here Comes Solar provides technical assistance to any project that is going through HPD's new construction or preservation finance program and any building that's part of the asset management program. So we're really here for any building that's getting or has HPD financing to provide technical assistance at every step of the way. So just to recap last session, if you weren't able to make it, the most important thing is that the SolarWare feasible policy is a win-win. It only requires projects to incorporate solar when it's actually beneficial for the building. Important tips is that the earlier you incorporate solar into the design, the better the design will be. This is especially true for new construction buildings. And solar can be optimized. So if you you can maximize your savings and return on investment by optimizing the solar design and really maximizing the incentives. And making a building itself solar ready will really lower your costs. And then there's also benefits that are beyond just the financial benefits of solar. For example, solar canopies can provide shade for tenant accessible spaces or HVAC systems. And if the building is doing electrification, then solar production can reduce the additional electric costs for those programs. And then maybe the most important thing is that you're not doing this alone. Technical assistance and tools are available for any part of the process. So Solar One is always available to provide free consultation and also procurement assistance for any HPD project. And you can reach out at affordable@solarone.org. As we will talk about very shortly, the solar screening tool is simple and is designed for non-solar professionals, so anyone should be able to use it. So quick introduction to local laws 92 and 94, if you're not already familiar with them. This is part of the Climate Mobilization Act of 2019, and these laws require either a green roof or solar on any new roof. So for new construction buildings, this is relevant, but until November 2024, most affordable housing can just waive out of this for financial unfeasibility and only need to comply with the law to the extent that is determined by HPD. Local laws 92 and 94 do not apply to existing roofs, but the concept is still the same. The city is moving towards making sure that buildings reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and improve their footprint in the city. So to dive into the solar where feasible mandate, the idea behind it is that HPD is committed to really capturing the benefits of solar, especially for affordable housing, by only requiring solar when it's financially beneficial to the buildings. So that means a payback period of 10 years or less. So the idea here is that every time buildings will save money on their operating expenses and also reduce carbon emissions. It also will help to reduce the city subsidy needed by underwriting to the electricity savings from solar. And we can provide free technical resources to owners and also HPD staff to make solar optimized and accessible to more buildings. So the details of this for new construction is that this is codified through the Enterprise Green Communities New York 2020 overlay. All projects must complete a solar feasibility analysis and include a signed solar approval form when they're filing for the EGC pre-build authorization or for a lead waiver. But waivers are available for projects if they're installing a green roof, if they can't accommodate 4 kilowatts of solar, which is really the minimum that's technically viable on a rooftop, or if they prove through the solar screening tool that it's really not financially feasible. On the preservation side, the system is a little bit simpler. Projects must complete a solar feasibility analysis and then include solar in the scope if it's financially feasible. The solar feasibility analysis can be completed as part of the integrated physical needs assessment or separately. And for projects that want it, Solar One can complete the feasibility analysis on behalf of teams. So it's not something that every team needs to learn how to do if you're just doing a one-off project. So let's talk about the solar screening tool and how you can use it to determine solar feasibility.
Great, thanks so much, Annika. So in the first session last week, we talked about what makes a building favorable for solar, meaning that it will likely be a good candidate for solar. Some traits of a building that'll make it good for solar include a large available roof area. If it's a low-rise building, it can support a ballasted design. If it's solar ready, meaning you've consolidated mechanicals, or there's just generally open roof area and you've prepared the electric system to integrate solar. And then a really important one is whether it's eligible for tax credits. Well, that's all great, and that'll give you kind of a preliminary sense of whether your building is good for solar or not. But that's not going to tell you whether it is required by HPD. And to determine if solar is required by HPD, you need to use the solar screening tool. And the definition really for feasible for HPD is a project that's greater than 4 kilowatts and that has a payback period of 10 years or less. So I'm going to walk through a couple of screenshots of this HPD solar screening tool, and then I'm going to be doing a live demo of the tool itself. So the solar screening tool is simply, it's a financial tool where you put in details about your building, and the more information you put in, the more accurate that information, the more meaningful the results. But the screening tool is going to take your inputs as well as assumptions about solar costs, incentives, and projected production and utility bill savings, and then generate a 25-year financial analysis, 25 years being the estimated useful life of a solar PV system. That screening tool results is going to include a lot of the detailed financial metrics that you as a developer or development team will want to understand with any investment, but one to really hone in on is going to be the payback period, where if that payback is 10 years or less, then you'll know that HPD will require that you include solar. So I'm gonna share my screen here, share my full screen. First, I'm just gonna walk through the screening tool. If you're wondering where you can access this tool to follow along, if you go to HPD's Solar Where Feasible website, there's a link that you can click to download the most recent version of the solar screening tool. You can see the version that I'm using now was updated in February. So we're updating this tool about once every 6 months or so. And we do strongly encourage you, as you're doing feasibility assessments for projects, to always go to the HPD website so that you can make sure you're using the most recent and up-to-date version. So the first tab here is instructions and assumptions. So you can get a lot of your questions answered by looking through here. It really documents in detail all of the default assumptions that are included in the tool. Again, if you are an advanced user, you can also override those assumptions, which we'll show. But for a typical user, there's a user inputs tab, and you need to populate all the fields. The top section is building characteristics. So, what is the name of the project, your HPD ID? This is important just so that when you submit this to HPD, they can line it up with all of the other documentation they have on file. Site address, whether it's a rental or a home ownership project, if it's new construction or renovation, number of BUs. And then these next ones start to get very important for the financial analysis. Whether prevailing wage is required, yes or no, that's going to impact the estimated cost of solar. The project completion year, this will impact the solar tax credit because that incentive does step down over time. If you're eligible for the solar tax credit, now this is an important one. As a rule of thumb, if it's a for-profit developer that pays federal income taxes, then the answer to this question is yes. But also if it's a nonprofit developer and it's a low-income housing tax credit project, so there's a tax credit syndicator, the answer is likely yes. If you're not sure about this one, it's a good one to talk about with your development team. The same is true for accelerated depreciation. This is an incentive that's available for solar. And it's one of those things where really the way that in the context of affordable housing development, most of the time people don't talk about solar accelerated depreciation. They just talk about a multiplier on the tax credit. The reason that you often will get a multiplier on a solar tax credit that's greater than 1 is because of accelerated depreciation. So we would, in many cases, in most cases, if your project can benefit from the tax credit, they can also take accelerated depreciation. The low-income housing tax credit. So is this a 4% deal? Is it a 9% deal? Or is it a non-tax credit deal? This is really important because solar can be included in the basis for a low-income housing tax credit and qualify for the solar tax credit. 4% deals, almost always the answer. Actually, let me jump to the next field here. Include solar in the LIHTC basis. So if your project is 4%, the answer here is almost always going to be yes, because the LIHTC allocation is uncapped. If it's a 9% deal, then it's not as straightforward. The answer could well be no, because you have plenty of eligible basis to include in the low-income housing tax credit basis. This is one where, again, if you're not sure, we'd encourage you to talk to your development team. You could also run the analysis both ways, just to understand if solar would be required either way. There are plenty of projects where the payback period without the low-income housing tax credit is 8 years, and with the incentive, it's 4 years. Well, either way, solar is going to be required. So from a scoping perspective, that's all you need to know. Is your project eligible for New York City's solar property tax abatement? Is the building in a landmark or historic district? That's going to impact costs, but for home ownership projects, it will also impact incentives. Income qualifying census tract, that's something you only really need to know for home ownership projects, because there's a state tax credit that's available for co-ops and condos that that install solar if they're in a income qualifying census tract. Then building height is something that will impact estimated cost. Estimated usable roof area for solar. This is going to impact the estimated size of a solar energy system. We're going to talk about how you can calculate estimated usable roof area in a moment after we do this demo. And then whether a canopy design is required or not. So these are things that are all going to influence the size and cost of a solar energy system. Next, we have owner-paid electricity information. So who is the utility? What are the estimated annual owner-paid electric costs? If this is something that you don't know, you can go to, you can look at sort of the standard underwriting guidelines for what the expected owner-paid electric costs will be per unit from HPD. There's whether it's a master metered building or not, whether there's an elevator or not, and then your contact information. Okay, so that sounded like a lot. The truth is that if you have this information, populating it is relatively quick. The next step is in the solar layout, just take a screenshot, a little thumbnail of either your roof layout with the usable roof area, or alternatively, if you have a solar design, you could include it here along with any notes down below. And then if we jump to the results, you're going to see a financial analysis that shows the size of the system, the estimated production, how much money you're going to save on an annual basis, and then cost breakdown. So for this example building, the upfront cost estimate is about $200,000. The cost after incentives is actually negative because this project is eligible for low-income housing tax credits, the solar tax credits, an incentive from NYSERDA, and everything else. It ends up being fully subsidized, and it has a really short payback period. For your payback from HPD's perspective, this is absolutely a feasible project, and HPD will require solar. There's another tab that I want to bring your attention to, which is the Advanced Inputs tab. Now, there's no requirement that you use this tab. However, if you are a sustainability consultant, or if you are an architect and you have a solar design, and you know a little bit more about the proposed solar project, you can absolutely use this to override our default assumptions. So let's say you did a solar design, and this screening tool is saying it's a 60 kilowatt system, but you know something that this tool doesn't, and you have a design that's really elegant, and it's only 50 kilowatts. That's fine. You just put that in, and then everything else will update. And let's say that this 50 kilowatt system has a price of $4 a watt, right? So if you already have this information and you know more than the tool, by all means, input that information, and it's all going to flow through to the screening tool. Just scrolling through this quickly to show you that, again, this is not stuff that as a user you need to do, but if you do have the knowledge and expertise, you can absolutely do that, and it's going to increase the accuracy of the results. So I'm gonna stop sharing the live demo and then talk a little bit more about some of these inputs. So usable roof area for solar. So this is a really important one. How to find the usable roof area. So if you already have a solar design, this input is not particularly relevant because the only thing that we use that field for is to estimate the size of your solar energy system. So if you don't have a solar design, then it is important. Pursuant to local laws 92 and 94, the sustainable roofing zone or the usable roof area for solar is contiguous roof areas that are greater than 200 square feet that are unobstructed and are not used for recreational space or are not required as fire department access pathways. So in this example on screen, you can see that there are kind of three big roof segments that are considered usable roof area. The square footage would be added together and then entered into that field on the screening tool. So one thing that we just want to emphasize is that the results of the screening tool really are driven by the input. So it is important that you put in accurate information. whether or not your building is eligible for tax credits will make a big difference in the payback period. The cost of the system, the size of the system, if it's ballasted or canopy, how it's metered and therefore the value of solar. All of these things impact the real financial viability of solar projects. So again, there's certainly a lot of value that that your sustainability consultant, if you have one, can add here in helping you understand these things. And of course, we're available to assist if needed, if you have any questions that your team can't answer independently. So this is probably our favorite thing about the screening tool. It's not just a tool where you look at your building, you see if it can do solar or not, you input the information, and then you get the answer. It's really intended to be a useful tool that can help you optimize your solar design. And again, on the intro slide, we talked about how the early bird catches the worm. The earlier that you start looking at solar, the more freedom that you have in designing a system that's going to really maximize benefit to your project, right? So this is just an example, but the same building, we have 4 different samples here or simulations. The first 2 are canopy designs, and then the next 2 are ballasted. And you can see that what we're modeling is this. Let's say it's a deal. You're not sure if you're going to get 4% LIHTC or not, so you want to look at it both ways. With these 4 different simulations, what you'll see is that the canopy with LIHTC has a 8-year payback. The canopy without LIHTC has a 13-year payback, so that would not be feasible by HPD's definition. And then a ballasted system has a 7-year payback with LIHTC and a 10-year payback without. So what you've learned by running a few different simulations is that whether or not you get low-income housing tax credits, if this deal moves forward, you would need to include solar, but you would not need to do a canopy. You would need to do a ballasted in either case. But let's say you do get the 4% LIHTC. So now you're looking at whether you should do a canopy or a ballasted. Well, your ballasted system has a lower upfront cost, and therefore it has a faster payback. It's only a 7-year payback, while the canopy has 8 years. So you might say, well, gosh, I should just do the ballasted. It's lower cost. It's going to pay for itself a lot more quickly. But then if you look at the estimated subsidy impact, you'll see that actually the canopy has the greatest negative subsidy impact. That's because that canopy system is larger. It's going to generate more electricity and therefore more savings for your development over its life. So these are the kinds of things that you can really think through, and the idea is that this tool is going to help you think critically and really optimize the way that you're integrating solar into your project. So with that, we're going to pause and answer any questions that you might have about the solar screening tool or about any of the incentives or other concepts that we covered in this segment of the presentation. You can feel free to use the Q&A section of Zoom, and we'll give it a couple minutes for questions.
While we're waiting for questions, it looks like a couple are coming in. I just want to say that the image here is for an affordable housing building, I think in New Jersey, but we would not usually recommend using solar as the walls of a building. Usually it's much more cost effective and beneficial to just put it on the roof.
Okay, we have an interesting question that Jen Leone, if you're on, I would maybe you could opine on this. But the question is, we have affordable buildings that are undergoing rehab with state capital and HUD, so they would not be required to conduct this analysis or be eligible for funding to do so under this initiative. So it's an interesting question. I guess what I would say in response to this question is, if you're working with income restricted affordable housing in New York City, and you want to figure out how to get solar onto that roof, then please do reach out to us. It's affordable@solar1.org. We are specifically contracted to provide support for HPD properties. However, we also provide pro bono services to other affordable housing projects, and would be happy to talk with you about solar for those state and federally funded projects as well.
I'll just jump in. If that didn't answer your question exactly, throw it back into the Q&A and we can bring it back up again. But if it's an HPD project, no matter what its source of funding or no matter whether it's required by the local law, if it's part of an HPD financing and it meets the payback, then it can and will be required on the projects. Oh, here we go. The question's back. Are projects not undergoing rehab or new not required to do the analysis? Okay, I think I understand the question. If you're coming to HPD for, again, I'm not a financing expert, but you are not coming for preservation funding, or you're not a new construction project going through Enterprise Green, you would not be required to do the analysis. Like if you are doing some kind of no construction refinance, you would not be required to do this, but you could talk to Solar One and see if there is a good cause to think about solar for your project.
Yeah, and just to say a little bit more about that, you know, this Solar Where Feasible program, HPD started with new construction, then expanded it to preservation. And really the final frontier is asset management. All of the buildings, the affordable housing properties that closed on financing in the past and are up and running, and you know, you may have projects in your asset management portfolio that are great candidates for solar. Not that it would be required, but there could be a significant opportunity, and we're looking forward to working with HPD and all of you to figure out what those opportunities are and to help you take advantage of them.
Okay, let's move on to the review process. And again, we'll have another opportunity for questions at the end of this section as well. So you can type questions as you go or ask them at the end. Okay, so first of all, I want to situate solar within the overall HPD financing process. So the first thing is the project comes into HPD. Fairly soon after that, we would like to do the solar feasibility analysis. As we said, the early bird catches the worm. So for EGC projects, the feasibility analysis has to be approved prior to submitting the pre-build or lead waiver. So that's where that is. And for preservation projects, it just needs to be done, you know, fairly early in the process. After solar is reviewed and approved by HPD, then for new construction and substantial rehab, EGC, you know, you do the EGC pre-build authorization, and then before the loan closing, you should do solar procurement. So the procurement of solar can be done either through Solar One. We can help you do it as a standalone procurement. It can be part of our bundled RFPs for solar contractors, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, or it can be part of the general procurement, but that, you know, does have to happen before loan closing. Then you select the solar contractor, and regardless of how you do the procurement, Solar One is always available to help review bids for accuracy and cost reasonableness. If you're not sure, you know, whether one type of panel is better than another, we can help you figure that out. And all of that happens prior to loan closing. One note here is that the solar design and permitting usually happens after loan closing, but if for your project you need all the permits before loan closing, then the solar design and permitting needs to happen before that, and it should be paid for out of pre-development financing. So keep that in mind. Then the rest of the construction is done on the building. Obviously, you can't install solar on a roof before the roof work is done. So the solar is installed as soon as the roof is complete. And when the system is installed, it's important that the solar installer and the roofing contractor are in close coordination so that the roof warranty is preserved. That's a very easy thing to do, provided that everyone is in good communication and working together. And then there's inspection and commissioning of the building and the solar itself. So now let's zoom in on the solar approval process itself. We'll zoom in a little bit. So this is an overview of the solar process. Basically, there's the feasibility analysis, which includes, which includes the solar approval form, the solar screening tool, and the roof plan. As I said before, Solar One can assist with filling out these tools for you if that's complex. Then Solar One reviews the solar feasibility analysis and sends a detailed summary to HPD. And HPD makes a determination about whether solar is required, recommended, or waived. Here we have a 2-week turnaround as long as the application is fully submitted and complete with all of the right information. And Solar One may or often does reach out to the applicant if there are questions about how the approval form or screening tool has been filled out. Then the approval form is signed by HPD. Solar with a payback period of 10 years or less is required. More than 10 years, 10 to 15 years is often recommended. And if you'd prefer, if it turns out that your system is not recommended, but you would like to include solar, you can resubmit a new design if solar isn't approved as is, and then we can review that new design to allow for solar if that needs to happen. And then after that, solar is included in the project and underwritten to the savings. HPD underwrites the solar savings. We're expecting it to be somewhere around 80% of the savings. So step by step, let's go through this one step at a time. First of all, step 0, and we can't emphasize this enough, you do not have to do this alone, and free technical assistance is always available from Solar One, especially for borrowers who are only doing this as a single time. We don't expect you to learn everything about solar and do it by yourself. We can help create the solar screening tool. We can help figure out what design would be most appropriate and which incentives you're eligible for. We can do the solar procurement and help evaluate bids. And then we can support on the implementation process. And then once the system is installed, we can also help with materials and training for building staff for how to take care of the system long term. The long and short of that, though, is that there's really very little that needs to be done to take care of the system. If you want more information about that, you can go back and look at the first presentation that we did last week, or the recording for that. So step 1 is the solar feasibility analysis. So you take the solar screening tool that Noah just went through, you find the results page, and then you just copy and paste the results onto the solar approval form. So you can see it's just one-to-one. You put in this information from the solar screening tool, and then there's a space for comments if you want to talk about something specific to this, unique characteristics of this project. One really important thing to note is that the solar approval form and the solar screening tool have to match. Otherwise, we have no idea which one is correct and which one is what you're actually planning on going with. Another note is that for multi-building projects, you can have, we have a continuation form for all of the other buildings in the project. So you would use the first page for the first building in the project, and then the same information is kind of consolidated on the continuation form. And so that's, you can use as many continuation forms as you'd like. So then you can say solar is required for, you know, this really big building where solar is viable, but on this small row home, then, you know, it doesn't really make sense. So it's not required, and we can be more clear about that. And again, Solar One can provide assistance with both creating the screening tool and also filling out the approval form. So then you upload the whole solar feasibility analysis. So that's the screening tool, the approval form, the roof plan or roof imagery, and if it's an existing building, the electricity bills to this portal, which asks for all of that information. And then, as Noah said, you should always use the most up-to-date forms that you can find on HPD's website. Once that's gone into the portal, then Solar One will do a review of the system and write up a summary that has all of the information about the project and sends that directly to HPD and the project manager. So the summary includes information about the applicant, information about the solar design, and the costs and benefits of the system. And it also includes Solar One's recommendations for HPD's review. So a solar required with a less than 10-year payback, solar recommended if it's greater than 10 years, but it has other benefits, or solar is waived if the roof is too small, if it's greater than 10 or 15 years, or some other reason. This review, as I said before, will take within 2 weeks. But if the application is incomplete, then that 2-week time doesn't start until a complete application is received. So let's go into the decision making that HPD uses for this required recommended. So if a project is 10 years or less in payback, it's just required. That's simple enough. If it's 10 to 15 years, it can still be a very good beneficial system. So that is often recommended, especially if it has co-benefits, like if you're doing community solar for the residents, or if there's a covered deck with a canopy system, or if the building owner is very interested in solar. You know, we always want to encourage people who are excited to do more solar to do that. So HPD will work with the borrower to determine if solar can be accommodated into the project budget. But usually between 10 and 15 years, solar is recommended, and then it's up to the team to decide if solar makes sense as part of the budget. If solar isn't included in the budget, but it is recommended, then we recommend that you make the building solar ready. As we mentioned in the previous workshop, you can do that with a couple very simple, very affordable procedures that will make it cheaper and easier to install solar later. And Solar One can help with doing a solar, finding out more about solar after a system, after the HPD financing process is complete. If a project has more than 15 years in payback, we usually don't recommend it because it's less financially viable. So, you know, any one of these things, if it's compliant with local law 92 or 94, if it has those co-benefits, if the owner is really interested, we still probably wouldn't recommend it unless it has multiple different benefits. So if it has a covered roof deck and it's community solar and it has minimal subsidy impact, then it might be recommended. But always keep in mind that if the borrower is interested, you can revise and resubmit the solar feasibility analysis to see if you can get back within the 10 to 15 year zone. And for projects that are seeking a waiver for DOB for a waiver to local law 92 and 94. That will be granted if you're including a green roof over 90% of the available roof space, or if there's not room on the roof for a 4 kilowatt system. Obviously, if it's really financially infeasible, then HPD will approve the waiver and sign the DOB waiver letter. So the solar approval form is signed by HPD and sent to the applicant. So the idea here is that this confirms that the solar feasibility analysis has been completed. It documents which design HPD is requiring, recommending, or waivering, and it notes whether a DOB waiver is required or not. For new construction, the HPD Sustainability Officer, that's Jen Leone, will sign the solar approval form and send it to the project manager and the applicant at the same time. Then the project manager can work with the borrower to determine if solar is viable on the project. For preservation, the project manager signs the solar approval form, but only after a determination has been made about whether solar should be included in the project. And once that's signed, that is an agreement between HPD and the owner about whether solar will be in the project or not. So it comes a little bit later on in the process. And then for new construction projects, or projects where a local law 92 or 94 is relevant, then HPD can issue a DOB waiver if the building is not compliant with local law 92 and 94. So if it does not have solar or green roof, if it has solar but it's not doesn't cover the entire roof area, yeah, those I guess are the options. So the applicant should note this on the approval form, and then HPD will create this document and send it to HPD. And you can use, the HPD project manager can use the solar summary to help with underwriting the costs of solar. So if solar is included in the project, then you can reduce the M&O costs by the amount of the year one savings. So that's the estimated year one utility savings. And for multi-building projects, the project savings are aggregated. And it's also important that the solar incentives are included in the project in the project description. So making sure that the New York Sun incentive and any of the relevant tax credits and tax abatements are accounted for. After solar is approved, often projects change, as many of you know. So just a note on some of these possible changes. If a project needs to be value engineered, one important thing to note is that if you're value engineering solar, then you lose that associated savings. So it shouldn't be the first thing to go, because there are many other aspects of a building that don't provide that 25 years of M&O savings. So Solar One can help you at any point in the process to revise the design, maybe reduce the subsidy impact, maybe reduce the cost entirely by competitively procuring the project. We should note that the solar screening tool is a relatively conservative estimate of the costs. So it's very likely that you would be able to get a lower cost for the system than what appears in the solar screening tool. And then if there's a significant change to the roof, then that's important to note. You should revise and resubmit the solar feasibility analysis. If, for example, you decide to add a roof deck or move the location of the bulkhead for new construction projects, or maybe remove a chimney for preservation projects. So Solar One can help optimize a redesign if that happens. And then after closing, things change as well. If contingency suddenly becomes available at the end of a project, it's possible that you could include solar at the last minute. That's something that Solar One has helped with in the past. So we can help determine whether a cost-effective array could be included. And if you complete the project without solar, it's also possible to use what's called a power purchase agreement or a lease, where the solar is not owned directly by the building, but you could get it for zero money down. So it could be a good cost-effective way to get solar, even if you couldn't include it in the budget of the project itself. So now let's talk about the contractor selection. I want to note the process that we've been doing for a number of years with the preservation program now, where we take multiple smaller buildings and bundle them into one quarterly RFP. And then we can get a much lower price for the many different buildings that are bundled together. So the way that this works is the project manager will notify Solar One as soon as possible of what the expected loan closing timeline is. And then Solar One can determine which quarter to include them in the bundled RFP. We timed these to be roughly prior to the main closing timelines of HPD. So then Solar One will create the bid documents and release the RFPs. The proposals are sent to HPD, and then HPD shares the proposals with Solar One, where we'll review the proposals and then create a really detailed bid comparison form. Here's an example of this that will help HPD make a determination both on price and also on quality, warranties, installer longevity, things like that. And then HPD will select the solar company and notify the participating borrowers, who will then work with their general contractor to sign the contracts with the solar installer who's selected. And then I also want to talk in general about kind of the safeguards that are included in HPD's solar requirements. So HPD has requirements that only top tier materials and installers are used. So the requirements include using a NYSERDA approved participating contractor, that the projects comply with all applicable codes, and that they comply with HPD's technical requirements, which is this document here, which makes sure that any project that goes through the HPD program also meets these basic requirements for quality assurance. And later this month, we'll be releasing an owner's guide for solar PV systems that has best practices for procurement and installation and operations. And this should help development teams optimize their solar performance and make sure that there's a minimum of maintenance expenses that should be zero or near zero throughout the lifetime of the system.
Great. Thanks, Annika. And maybe how about we'll do conclusions and then take questions at the end, just looking at the time.
Sure.
So I'm going to quickly summarize. To kind of boil it down, there are really three big things that are required for the solar feasibility analysis: the solar approval form, a roof plan, and then the solar screening tool. For existing buildings, you also need to provide utility bills for 12 months, just to confirm that information is accurate. When you submit that information, we're going to be reviewing that on behalf of HPD. It's a 2-week review, after which HPD will issue a signed solar approval form. The solar approval form is required for EGC pre-build and the IPNA. And again, projects with a 10-year payback are considered feasible, and so HPD will require them. Projects with a 10 to 15-year payback will be recommended, and you can work with your HPD project manager to figure out if that's going to be in scope or not. The solar screening tool is meant to help you optimize your solar project. And last but not least, Annika, myself, and our team are here to help. We can provide free assistance throughout the process. So you should definitely feel free to reach out to us. The best way is by emailing affordable@solar1.org. And we're happy to stick around a little bit past 2:30 to answer questions. And in case anybody drops off before the Q&A, we just want to thank you all for your participation and for attending. We will be sending out recordings of both this and the previous session that we held last week. And we look forward to working with you all to get solar onto your projects.